There are certain effects in After Effects that I call fixer effects that are there to fix problems with your footage. And we're going to have a look at those here. So if you want to follow along, open Effects AEP from the Effects folder and open up 05 Fixing Problems. And in here you'll see I have a bearskin wearing guard who's doing a lovely little march. And it's been shot using a handheld camera. Now you can see that lovely Michael Jackson move he's doing there as he slides across the ground at the end there. I love that. So this was shot with a DSLR camera, and one of the problems is there's movement from the camera. The other problem is if you have a look at the top here, you'll notice that window jumping a little bit. And this is a ripple caused by a rolling shutter. Now DSLR cameras and some other cameras use a rolling shutter, which means the shutter isn't open for a fixed period of time. It actually scans the image over a period of time and records the image over a period of time. So in other words, it could be, if it scans from the top to the bottom, that these pixels up here are recorded before the pixels at the bottom. And sometimes, depending on the movement that's made with the camera, this can cause problems, things like ripples and curves in the image. So we have a fantastic tool called the Warp Stabilizer, which is great for stabilizing footage and fixing those kind of problems. And you'll see that this is how good it is. It can completely stabilize that footage. Now we do lose a little bit of the footage by doing that, so we may not want to stabilize it. And notice it also fixes the rolling shutter problem here. And if I open the Warp Stabilizer effect, you'll see that's included in the detailed analysis section here. But there are times where you don't necessarily want to stabilize footage, you just want to fix the rolling shutter problem. And that's where the standalone rolling shutter repair filter comes in very handy. And if I preview that, you'll see that that fixes the rolling shutter ripple problem, but still maintains the handheld look of the camera. Sometimes you want to keep a handheld camera, but you just want to remove that rolling shutter problem. And that's what the rolling shutter repair tool gives you. Now I've just used the default settings. You may want to go and tweak settings such as rolling shutter rate, scan direction, and some of the advanced options in here, whether you want to use a warp or actually move the pixels. If you want to find out more about what each of these do, you can use our wonderful online help to find out more about the rolling shutter repair problems. Now there are other fixer effects. Another one that I really like to show is Refine Matte. And Refine Matte is usually part of the Rotobrush tool, but it can also be applied as a standalone effect. And it can be used anywhere where you have a matte. So, for example, with keyed footage or with a matte that's been created, like the one we created for the lens blur effect. So I just apply it, and you'll notice that as I apply it, notice the edges of this keyed footage tend to disappear. And I usually find that the Refine Matte settings as a default are a little bit too much. So what I'm going to do is remove the smooth value and remove the feather value, which gives me my nice edges back again. And instead, I'm just going to use it to apply a motion blur. So I'm going to put that up to about 360. And now we have a motion blur applied where she's moving quickly. Now if I put that up to something like 720, that's a little bit too much, but you'll see that exaggerated even more. So being able to apply a motion blur to keyed footage is very important. You can also use it to decontaminate edges, and you can put a little bit of a feather on there as well if you want to. Let's put a 5% feather. And if we preview that, it just softens the edges, and if someone's moving very quickly, puts a little bit of motion blur in there. I've overdone it a little bit. And I would normally put a higher quality motion blur in there as well. But it can be really effective when you're working with footage like this of people dancing. Now if I switch that off and we have a look at it without it, you see it's a little bit flat without it. But as soon as I apply Refine Matte, we start to get a much more interesting effect. So you see it's much softer, much smoother movement. So that's how I use some of these fixer effects. Other ones that you can have a look at in the online help are things like remove grain for removing grain from footage. Time warp can be used also for adjusting frame rates, for sorting out timing issues, for things like dropped frames, for example. So check out some of my fixer effects that I've suggested that you have a look at in the online help.